We're joined now by our Beast of the Week, John Avlon. He's the former editor-in-chief of The Daily Beast and former senior political analyst and anchor for CNN. He started as Rudy Giuliani's speechwriter, and John's career has been dripping with success, I guess, up until now. For this election, he ran for Congress on Long Island in New York's District 1 in Suffolk County, but he lost to Nicholas LaLota, a Republican incumbent who won 55% of the vote to John's 44%.
Thank you so much. It's so delightful to be talking to you. Thanks for saying yes to us.
Of course. To the beast, always. Once a beast, always a beast.
Tell us about the campaign. First of all, why did you run?
Well, I ran because I felt like talking about this election on TV was civically lazy, frankly, given the stakes of the race. I believed that our American democracy was in danger, and that Margaret and I ultimately decided, my wife, Margaret Hoover, that we didn't want to look at our kids and tell them when we could have done more when it mattered most. And so I'm glad I got in the arena. We fought the good fight. Our polls showed us that we were surging and in a position to win. And then the red wave that affected so many swing districts hit us. But Democrats do need to, I think, get not uselessly introspective, but honestly introspective. And I'm always a country over party guy, a principle over party guy. I was an independent for 20 years as a journalist, and I meant it, right? I just felt there was one party that actually believed in bipartisanship that was and building a big tent right now. So I do think the Democrats got to, as I've said, stand up to the far left as well as the far right.
How do you do that? What's the mechanism for the Democrats rethinking, or for the Democrats analyzing what went wrong?
Well, look, there will be 1,001 forensics, but I do think it requires dealing with, in polls consistently, people perceive the Democratic Party as equally extreme as the Republican Party. Now, it's not. I can push back on that in a million different ways, and did so during the campaign with some data crimes. There were 7 members of the House who supported the policy known as defund the police, which I think is the most self-defeating slogan in recent political memory. This goes back to the last cycle.
Probably the worst 3 words uttered in modern politics.
Yeah. But 139 House Republicans voted to overturn the election after the attack on the Capitol. That's a qualitative, fundamental difference. But I do think, in states like New York, taxes are too high. The core of my campaign was the slogan, rebuild the middle. We got to rebuild the middle of our politics and rebuild the middle of our economy, and those two things are connected. And I think it also means speaking out with moral clarity when there's illiberalism on the far left. I think that's really important.
How do we even begin, really? How do we begin to have civil, substantive conversations in the wake of everything that has just passed? I am literally asking you how we do that, because I don't know.
My favorite, sadly apocryphal Abraham Lincoln quote is, "I'm an optimist because I don't see the point in being anything else." But I'm not trying to sugarcoat the dangers of this American moment. The idea that Trump could get more votes after trying to overturn our democracy on the back of a lie is something that is a challenge to all my notions of ethics and honor and decency.
Can I push back on one thing? I think a lot of people feel that January the 6th was a bunch of strange losers who turned up at the Capitol. But the fact that they were all filming themselves and putting it on Facebook of all social media platforms, doesn't suggest that it was actually an organized effort to take over our democracy. I'm not saying it was a great moment in American life, but I'm not sure that people bought that it was actually a systematic takeover of the American democratic system.
What it clearly was a semi-coordinated effort to stop the certification by deadlines, to try to create a constitutional crisis, to say that they didn't lose an election, that they did, and then to try to seize power if they could. I'm not saying there's any easy answers here. There's not. And this is going to be the thing I'm most concerned about is that the alliance of autocracies are going to be emboldened at this moment. And frankly, also, American journalism seems to be on the back foot. And I think it's vitally important that journalists are up to the challenge of covering this administration fairly, accurately, honestly, and aggressively.
Yeah, and I guess I do worry about that vengeance and retribution. I think it's going to be such a murky phase of life for journalists coming into the next 4 years. What is your take on that? I'm very worried for the state of journalism and broadcast television.
Well, I was going to ask you, John, what did you think of Jeff Bezos' decision, which we discussed on last week's pod, to not endorse Kamala Harris after the endorsement had been written? And then, of course, he was very quick onto X to congratulate President Trump on his victory.
I thought that was ill-timed and did not reflect the courage that Marty Baron had brought to the paper and the kind of self-evident moral clarity. Now, I do think that journalism needs to take very seriously the need to regain trust, and I think there are interesting ideas on how to do that. But the anticipatory obedience that Timothy Snyder talks about, I think you could see in the decision of the LA Times, the Washington Post, and the USA Today. USA Today, perhaps most forgivably given their status, but not the Washington Post given their pedigree. And I think that's one of the dangers. I mean, we do need to be very clear-eyed about, I'm a historian on the side, and the historical patterns and forces we're dealing with. And the idea that big businessmen and very wealthy people can channel someone with autocratic tendencies in a constructive direction that benefits them is one that history suggests is a fool's errand.
I love the way you say you're a historian on the side, by the way. What are you on the side, Sam?
On the side, a cowardly baker. No, I don't know. I don't know what I am on the side.
It's the sort of thing that, I'm a stripper on the side. I'm sort of...
It feels like America has become desensitized to the type of behavior that would have just been unthinkable in a leader just 20 years ago. I mean, I was there for the Dean scream. That was disqualifying, and it was so lighthearted. I mean, it was just not even... It's so irrelevant in today's world. It's pastoral.
Pastoral. Look, I do think that's one of the dangers. And the things that trouble me the most are there's certain principles that I take as moral bedrock, right? Character is destiny. Decency matters. But we also need to look at the fact that, Latino men seem to have voted for Donald Trump, that white women voted against the Democratic nominee again.
Can I ask you something? Why is it so surprising that Latino men would vote for Donald Trump? Why is there an assumption that because you are a Latino and you probably got here legally, you would support the idea of people coming in illegally? That feels to me like one of the big mistakes that Democrats made.
I agree. And that's one of the reasons I go back to, I think, the limitations in people's pushback against identity politics. It's ultimately demeaning, right? I mean, first of all, as has often been said, the Hispanic community is incredibly diverse. Democrats in the last cycle had a hard time, for example, being tough on Castro. Go pull my obit, quote unquote, for Fidel Castro from the Daily Beast, and you'll see I shed no tears for that cat. Or Ortega or Maduro. And folks who get here legally, it's more the dysfunction, right? I mean, and the fact that, when people commute from Long Island or Westchester and if they get out at Grand Central Station and they see the Roosevelt Hotel, they get a sense of exaggerated civic disorder. And I do think this is where it's really important that Democrats have to be tough on crime and have to be tough on the causes of crime. They need to be. I campaigned very strongly. I would have voted for that bipartisan border security bill on day one that Donald Trump and my opponent helped kill.
I think there's no group of voters that is monolithic, and that includes women.
I think there might be a group of voters that I call the CVS voters who want to go into their local CVS, buy things that aren't locked behind glass cupboards, where you have to press the bell and get someone to come over to get you a tube of toothpaste. I think it's those frustrations which indicate to people that culture's not working for them. And Democrats completely fail to solve it. The idea that you can, steal up to $900 worth of stuff in San Francisco and nobody's going to come after you. That's what impacts people's regular daily lives.
I also think that we cannot discount the fact that many voters look at Trump and see his life as aspirational. Mm-hmm. There is something aspirational about just being rich.
I'm not going to feed into that, but I think I agree with Joanna on the first point. Look, the quote that keeps me up at night and has in politics for a long time is from Bill Clinton, where he said, people will vote for strong and wrong every time. And that's where I think Democrats need to be stronger. We need to be tougher on crime. When there's civic disorder, it needs to be addressed. I mean, this is where it goes back to my background working for Rudy Giuliani when he was saying, as mayor of New York, quality of life policing works. Mm-hmm. It's important for people don't have a sense of civic chaos and civic disorder. And if you effectively decriminalize, shoplifting, that's going to make that does not resonate as common sense. If people feel that they're going to get civic chaos and high crime, they'll vote for the other guy, no matter how bad that is.
John, also talk about the evolution of the podcast election, and you talk about
the evolution
media.
of this podcast.
But you talk about the right-wing media, and obviously there's Fox, which has its position, but this has been very much an election where conversations were going on TikTok, in particular around young people and the algorithm driving this sense of we were somehow living through the new depression. X, owned by the richest man in the world and currently best friend of Donald Trump, who's promised all sorts of, lucrative government contracts and a role dismantling a lot of government bureaucracy. Talk about X, talk about TikTok, talk about podcasts, talk about Joe Rogan. Should Kamala have done Joe Rogan?
Yes. The answer is always to reach out and not be afraid to go on and have extended, open, honest conversations. That's just about authenticity. And even to go into areas where you perceive it will have the confidence to go into speak to audiences you may perceive will be tough or not on quote unquote your side. That's part of, frankly, the obligation of running. And I tried to do that. I do think she should have. I think podcasts, nonetheless, it's enormously impactful. There's a lot of different ways I think the whole process of spreading a message needs to be fundamentally reimagined.
But this just sounds like the Republicans figured out how to send their message more effectively. When you say about authenticity, yes, she should have gone on Joe Rogan. One of the criticisms of Kamala Harris was that she didn't appear to be authentic, that she said the same things time and again, and she only went on friendly media.
Yeah, and I think she actually ran. Look, we need the full data, and this is about Musk throwing in on X. Remember, initially he was going to stand up to the far right and the far left and all that stuff, and then he threw all in. And I think the impact of Musk throwing in personally and not being held to standards of military contractors, and the impact of X and his effort probably is one of the most important, probably still underappreciated aspects of this election.
And I think it needs to be said before we move on from this point that the Republican Party, the GOP in particular, is willing to say absolutely anything. They're literally willing to spread a lie that is so pernicious and so damaging and spread it all over the place. Haitian populations tearing apart cats and dogs. Eating cats and come on. This was the vice president of the United States spreading this malicious lie that just spread everywhere. So they actually... There's more than just better messaging and better mechanisms for messaging. There's also the fact that a lot of the messaging is just boldly incorrect and a bold lie that spreads like wildfire because it's so fascinating and interesting and shocking.
Well, there's the danger that, what Steve Bannon calls flooding the zone with shit, that it means that good people don't want to get in the arena because it seems like a fundamentally indecent place. Why would you risk your family, your finances, your reputation by participating in our democracy? I felt that's exactly what we should do. So I have 0% regrets doing what I did. And I'm proud of the campaign we ran and the people we inspired, and we did. And so, but that's one of the things that made how sinister it is to see a lie about an election used as a litmus test for party loyalty, and people fall into line. And when we get numb to that, that's when things get incredibly dangerous. And unfortunately, I think that's where we are. And that I do believe in having conversations with Trump supporters, as I did over the course of this campaign, and we won some of their votes.
John, what did you learn when you had conversations with them? When you were going door to door, what did you learn?
What I heard was this. First of all, a lot of Trump voters really do feel we need to reunite as a nation. They feel that. Their focus is on what they perceive to be intolerance from the far left. And I think that's part of what is driving young men. They don't feel respected. They feel sort of suspect when they're in sort of civic conversations, and that causes them to kick back. The excesses, again, of identity politics just getting in the way of treating people as individuals. I think that's part of the undertone and undertold story.
I have two sons in their mid-20s. I see their friends all the time, and what I hear from them is they feel they're almost guilty for being a young white man. They all felt that the education systems they were in were basically girls' schools or girls' colleges, which, reluctantly took young men.
But isn't that also identity politics? You identify as a young man who has grievances in this world where you have so much power and control. You really do. You really do.
Well, hold on. But let's dig into this, because this is where I think we start to have a breakdown. I wrote the book Wingnuts. Today happens to be my anniversary.
Oh, congratulations, by the way. I meant to
Congratulations.
say that at the beginning. Congratulations on your wedding anniversary.
Congratulations to my wife, Margaret, who's the host of Firing Line. And I was saying her show is more important than ever before in terms of a civic space where you can have civil conversations. Yeah. And I saw people from retirees to union workers to, people that love her show because that's not what they're getting. But putting aside for that shameless plug for my wife, 15 years ago, 2 nights ago, I handed in the manuscript for Wingnuts, which was the first Beast book, which was a book about Wingnuts, how the lunatic fringe is hijacking America. And it was based on my reporting at the time as a columnist about the proto-Tea Party protests after Obama was elected. And I did it sort of with a look at what the background history was. But one of the chapters is called The Birth of White Identity Politics, or White Minority Politics. So I agree with you. That's one of the reasons I don't like identity politics is Donald Trump has revealed the dangers of identity politics by weaponizing white identity politics.
Yes.
And as a historian, the resistance to multiracial democracy is profound in our country. We should be studying Reconstruction a heck of a lot more than we do, right? But the idea that young white men or white men who were working their ass off and trying to provide for a family at a time when it's more difficult to rise to the middle class and rise out of the middle class and provide for your family, that they are avatars of privilege because of their gender and ethnicity or race does not remotely reflect their lived experience, and it causes a lot of righteous resentment. And that's different than grievance politics. What I'm particularly interested in, this is a whole separate topic for another day, is how you do have a whole series of folks who are millionaires, billionaires, centimillionaires, very wealthy, successful people who spend a lot of time sort of marinating in grievance politics. They feel aggrieved. That's much more absurd to me than a guy who is working his ass off and all of a sudden being told that he's got the beneficiary of white privilege when that doesn't reflect his day-to-day experience at all.
You were running in the Hamptons, but you had probably the widest differential of wealth in the entire country, because you've got the richest people in America and you've also got some of the poorest people who service the richest people. Did the inequality of wealth come up much?
Just to understand, the district is Huntington to Montauk. So it's eastern end of Long Island all the way to Huntington. And by the way, the district is one of the most educated districts per capita in the country. But it does have a lot of wealth disparity, and that's what the frustration is. It's the middle class squeeze is going on for decades, which is driving a lot of the anger and frustration in our politics. That's incredibly clear. And the frustration about affordability is fundamental. It's about housing, but it's also inflation and cost of groceries and just it's harder to make ends meet. The fact that Trump and the Republicans took away the state and local tax deduction is a huge issue here. The fact that they just got elected and will almost certainly not lift that cap, and Democrats would have, a lot of folks just codified the fact that their taxes got raised. And this is particularly disproportionate on hardworking, middle class families.
There is not one person that I talk to out in the world, outside the bubble of New York City, and I do talk to people outside the bubble of New York City, which would be very surprising to you, Joanna.
It's totally surprising. They're only in Canada.
There is not one person who does not feel the pinch of prices. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal for people that blueberries cost somehow $11 and they used to cost $3. Like, it's a big ass deal. And it is at the forefront of everybody's minds. And that's just reality.
John, is this the first time something hasn't gone right for you? You seem one of those incredibly...
This is the only time.
Yeah, incredibly successful. Your career's had an incredible trajectory. You seem, in all the photos of your campaign, you seem like the perfect family. Is this the first time anything's gone wrong?
No, of course not. And look, you deal with difficulty. I'm a big believer that, first of all, one of the few things you can control in life is how hard you work. 2, nothing is given. 3, life is 90% mental. And so you need to, I read the Daily Stoic every day, along with other things with my morning coffee. This has been tough for my kids because they campaigned a lot with me. My son in particular was really into it. This is hard, but you also have to model that, in a democracy, you don't always win. And as I said in my email after the election, about fighting it's called the good fight. I said, look, democracy depends on respecting the results, even when you don't win. And patriotism requires loving your country, no matter who's president. I believe those things. But if we believe them, we need to model them.
What do you do now?
I did remember in the context of this campaign, as I had been at the Beast, that I particularly enjoy running things and leading things.
Well, you're not having that job.
No. I'm not coming after your job. You own the joint. Well negotiated.
But we do want you to come back as a regular contributor to the pod.
I'd be happy to. I enjoy your conversation. I love what you're doing with the Beast. I think there's so much important work to be done, particularly to hold the individuals in this administration to account and to not sort of fall sway to that sense that, they're going to run the table because good people get disengaged, throw up their hands and say, what the hell, because that's where the real danger occurs.
Yep.
We need strong independent journalism more than ever right now.
Well, we relish that challenge. That's the point of it.
Thank
John,
you so much.
Yeah,
This was
thank you so
great
much.
Conversation.
Have a wonderful anniversary with Margaret.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate you. Keep fighting the good fight.